day you disappeared, I wish I had seen it clear. Gregory spilled out of Freddy's chest hatch the moment the elevator's doors closed on the atrium floor, his skin itching with the discomfort. He wished he didn't feel the need to lie like that. He supposed he didn't necessarily have to, but he was too terrified of having Freddy turn on him to consider anything else. He wanted Freddy's companionship as much as he wanted to get out of this place. It was a thin tightrope to walk. I can see so much more now, Freddy offered as he patted behind Gregory. I'm sure this will help us find a way out for you. It was an olive branch, and a moment of understanding. A thank you, despite the circumstances. I think you're right, Gregory agreed, shooting a small smile at the bear over his shoulder. You're welcome. Gregory, a voice called from somewhere to their left. Gregory turned his head and spied Evan, sitting against the wall they had left him by, waving and smiling. He was clearly excited they had returned. Did you do it? Sure did, Gregory responded, not caring about his own yelling as he made his way over to the boy. Freddy and I are the best duo. And me too, right? Evan asked. He seemed to regret asking the question, because he then lowered his eyes, and his face became sullen. I know I haven't helped, but... His explanation fell, and he muttered vacant nothings under his breath. Gregory felt immediate sympathy. Of course, he reassured, kneeling in front of the kid. Listen, when we get out of here, I'm going to find us some matching t-shirts, to make it official. Evan's expression brightened, and he giggled. That's silly. Sure is, Gregory laughed, smiling at Evan. Gregory's heart felt light with the small conversation. Especially after Roxy, he was so thankful to have these little moments. Evan's eyes met his. It was clear he felt the same. Evan's eyes then shifted, looking at something over Gregory's shoulder. Something in his silver gaze changed, and his expression morphed, going from cheery to frozen, like the world had been paused. Gregory frowned and followed the boy's eyes, seeing nothing but Freddy, who was standing maybe a dozen feet away. Gregory looked back at Evan. What's wrong, kid? Evan swallowed. His form became staticky again. Thankfully, his head wasn't splitting like it had earlier, but he looked unsettled, nonetheless. Freddy's looking at me. Gregory's brows furrowed and tilted his head. He looked back at Freddy, narrowing his eyes. Freddy was disturbingly still, like everything inside his mechanics just turned off. Even his little ears were unmoving. The only thing that told Gregory that Freddy was, in fact, still awake was the fact that his eyes were moving back and forth, quick little jumps, soft clicks of servos, like he was taking in every detail of a small, confined space. Gregory couldn't help but shudder. Something seemed tilted, off-center, straight up fucking wrong. Freddy? Gregory tried, moving in front of Evan. What's wrong? Freddy's eyes stopped moving, landing on Gregory's face. The gaze was still and intense, and lasted in between the moments of silence for far, far too long. I can see him, Freddy said finally, though something was off in his voice. Gregory couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it almost sounded like another person was talking too, right beneath the usual vernacular of Freddy's smooth voice. It was barely discernible, but Gregory noticed the change instantly. I can see him. Oh, Gregory breathed. That's good. He wasn't sure what else to say. If Freddy had revealed that information any differently, Gregory probably would have been overjoyed. But the inflection was so out of bounds of what Gregory was used to hearing from Freddy, it made him feel uneasy. Hi, Freddy, Evan said from behind Gregory. His voice was small. To Gregory's shock, Evan stood up from his spot on the wall and moved to stand a little ahead of Gregory. The boy was getting braver by the moment. It's nice to meet you. Evan was obviously very unnerved by Freddy's sudden change in attitude, but he seemed to find the confidence, deep beneath his anxious exterior, to try to address the situation. Gregory felt a pang of pride towards the kid. Suddenly, a low sound rumbled from Freddy. Gregory tensed, and Evan took a step backwards as the sound warbled through the air. It was a deep, keening sound that rested just beneath Gregory's skin, making his hair stand on end. The sound hitched for a moment before it carried on again, this time higher-pitched, like the apex of a deeply sorrowing sob. It sounded mournful. It sounded human. Boy. Freddy's voice rumbled, taking an uneven, lumbering step towards the pair of children. Freddy's footfalls were normally loud and heavy, something Gregory was used to. But this step, for whatever reason, sounded too intense. It was like the robot was on the brink of collapse. What's your name? The question from Freddy bordered on pleading, the lilt of the words sinking into something despairing and haunted, like the fate of the universe hinged on whatever answer the ghost decided to give. I don't like this. Evan whined, his posture starting to fold. His form began to blacken, starting to melt back into the shadowy form Gregory had first found him in. You're scaring me. Freddy took another step towards them before halting in his tracks. Something in his eyes glittered and broke, a slash of deep slate glazing over the bright blue of Freddy's normal gaze. The two colors fought for control for a literal second before Freddy's head buzzed slowly and the irises landed on gray. The sorrowful gaze merely deepened, the aura of agony stilled, building into a crux as a simple name fell from the bear's slack mouth. Evan. Freddy's question was barely a whisper on the stagnant air, just a hushed sound, a plea quieted by the weight of the neon and the history of this place. His voice, not entirely his own, now whatever background sound had been under his normal voice a moment before, was at the helm. It was a broken sob, a voice crack splitting against the vowels, that definitely was reflective of Evan's own soft, eloquent accent. Evan. Evan paused, physically, his body freezing in its protective stance, staring hopelessly up at the animatronic. He didn't say anything. Gregory never said the kid's name to Freddy. Not once. Freddy must have recognized him. Freddy's legs creaked as he crashed to his knees, cracking the tile beneath the weight of his agony. He didn't break his gaze with the kid, his stare so powerful and raw it made Gregory's stomach twist with sympathetic pain. He didn't know what had unsettled Freddy so deeply, so personally, but it was simply horrific to watch. Freddy reached for Evan, but aborted the gesture halfway through when the kid flinched and angled himself away. Evan. Freddy sobbed again, still in that voice that absolutely wasn't Freddy's. Evan. Evan. He said his name like a mantra, a prayer. Evan sniffed, whining. Stop saying my name. You're scaring me. Freddy, not Freddy, paused as his expression broke, revealing an emotion that was somehow even more agonized than before. I'm so sorry. Evan, I'm so sorry. Freddy, what are you saying? Gregory interjected. What's going on with you? Freddy's eyes snapped to Gregory, and his gaze looked so wrong, so melancholic, and off-putting with the glittering silver stare. Gregory. Freddy groaned. It sounded so wrong, so precisely not how Freddy would say it. There was no deep comfort entwined with the gentle way he would normally say his name. This was the pleading skeleton of someone else. Some etch of personality and experience that Gregory did not recognize and did not trust. This... The person possessing Freddy didn't finish their thought. They gripped Freddy's head between Freddy's paws and blinked Freddy's eyes before settling their not Freddy stare back on Evan. It's... Evan, it's Michael. Something in Evan's eyes flashed, a combination of recognition, hesitation, and that familiar pang of fear. Evan's brows furrowed, and he drew his arms to his chest, making himself seem impossibly smaller. What's Michael? Me, the person explained, the word catching in his throat somewhere. It's me, Evan. Evan's eyes got impossibly wide, his pupils scanning all over Freddy's face, like he was seeing the animatronic for the first time. Perhaps he was trying to look past Freddy's metal and wiring, searching instead for this Michael, who seemed like they were just about as human as Gregory was. It's me, Michael said again after a moment passed. His voice hushed. It's me. Another beat passed, and something in Evan's posture changed. He loosened his stance, and his energy bent towards the bear, like he was 2 seconds away from running right into Freddy's slack arms. Conflict surged in Evan's gaze, something that was both deeply hurt and insurmountably infatuated. Evan recognized Michael. Mikey, Evan tried, his voice just as breathless. Michael nodded Freddy's head, the ears bobbing. Yes. Oh, Evan, I missed you so much. Evan seemed unsure, like he didn't wholly believe what Michael was saying. Really? Yes. Oh, Evan, I missed you so much. Yes, Michael repeated, this time gentler. I'm so sorry, Evan. I love you. I'm sorry. I can't. Michael's gaze fell again, mumbling self-deprecating hisses and half-formed apologies under his breath. The trio lapsed into silence again. Gregory looked over to Evan, hopelessly lost. Evan stared at Michael for a few more moments before meeting Gregory's eyes. His expression seemed flat, like he wasn't sure what emotion he was feeling. He chewed his lip and nodded his head toward Freddy. Michael's my brother. That was possibly the last thing Gregory expected to learn from that interaction. His face must have revealed his shock because Evan grimaced. He looked back at the animatronic, who was hanging his head, staring resolutely at Evan's feet. Michael killed me. Evan said so nonchalantly, so evenly. It felt for a moment that Evan had said the most normal thing in the world. Michael shuddered and keened again, bending further under his broken bow, until his brow touched the grimy tile floor. His hands gripped the back of his head. Gregory imagined he'd be pulling his own hair if he had any. Gregory didn't think he had ever seen a person so shattered by grief and guilt before in his life. Some part of him flared with anger. Anger for Evan's death. Anger for this person, his brother, who murdered his own kin. "I thought you said Fredbear bit you," Gregory found himself saying, watching Freddy's body shake. "He did," Evan said. He took a step forward, his shins almost hitting the top of Freddy's head. Michael did not look up. "But my brother put me in his mouth." Michael flexed his fingers, digging his claws deeply into the back of his head, the metal peeling and squealing at the harm. "Freddy," Gregory chastised instinctively, wincing at the sound. "Stop doing that. You'll hurt yourself." Gregory understood that whoever this was had pushed Freddy's consciousness down into the furthest depths of their being. There was no use in speaking to him, but he couldn't call his friend by some name he didn't know. He also figured it wasn't really painful in all actuality, but he didn't want to see the animatronic hurt itself. Thankfully, Michael stopped goring Freddy's head at Gregory's plea, resorting to just gripping his head with hands instead of claws. "Mikey," Evan murmured, fidgeting his hands, looking a mix between apathetic and 2 seconds away from a true nervous breakdown. "It was you, for those nights, wasn't it? It wasn't Father, was it?" Michael nodded into the floor, sniffing miserably. "Yes, it was me." "You looked so different, but I still thought it was him. We all did." Evan paused, gathering himself. "Did you know I was there?" Michael shrugged. He still didn't look up at either of the boys. "I hoped you weren't. I didn't know the extent of what William had done." He released a shuddering sigh, drawing his knees slightly closer together. "I just wanted to undo everything William did to them, and atone for what I had done." Finally, then, Michael lifted his head, only slightly, and looked up at Evan past his brows. "I'll never be able to do either, but I at least wanted to try." Michael lowered his eyes when Evan didn't answer. He shook his head again, pawing at the towel with his hands. "Why are you still here, Evan? Why didn't you leave when I burnt the place down? Why didn't you rest?" Evan quirked his mouth, something sympathetic glowing in his eyes. "Why haven't you?" Michael didn't speak for a moment. I don't know," he admitted after a beat. "When Uncle Henry and I hope he's okay. We tried. I thought it was enough." Michael's voice broke at the end of the sentence. He drew up what sounded like the last stretches of his strength to speak again. "I thought I was enough." A moment passed before Michael sighed again. It was the most defeated sound Gregory had ever heard someone utter. "Tell me to leave, Evan," Michael murmured. "Please, just tell me that you hate me, that you'll never forgive me. It's okay, I'll understand. I'll never be sorry enough." Evan stood, looking upon his groveling brother, his huge eyes wet with unshed tears. His lip was trembling, he seemed so unsure of what to do. After a moment of internal deliberation, Evan slowly lowered himself to the ground, kneeling next to Freddy's bowed head. Michael did not react. He simply stared at the tiles inches from his nose, silently. Evan raised his little hand, hovering just above the scratches that had been clawed into Freddy's head. His hand hesitated there, for a long time. After about a minute or two, Evan gently lowered his hand to the animatronic's head. Michael froze at the touch, drawing his limbs inward. He didn't say anything. For a moment, Michael looked identical to his brother. "You know," Evan hummed, simply resting his hand on the metal, "I almost expected you to be Uncle Henry." Michael didn't move as he seemed to process that, but his jaw moved slightly a few moments afterward. "What makes you say that?" "Uncle Henry always preferred the bear ones. I saw that this one wasn't normal. It was more like me, my friends. I didn't expect it to be you." Michael shifted a bit. "Would you have preferred that if it was Henry instead?" "I'm not angry it's you, Mikey," Evan said. "I just didn't expect you."
"Why aren't you angry?"
Michael suddenly hissed. All of his being tensed, and he suddenly rose to his knees. Even not fully standing, the animatronic towered over poor Evan. Gregory expected the kid to bolt at the change, maybe even vanish. But no. The kid simply stared the animatronic straight in the face, his expression searching and intense. He was not afraid. Even as Michael raised his voice, the kid did not flinch a bit.
Why aren't you, Evan? You have all the reason in the world to never want to see me again. But here you are, still fucking listening to me like anything I ever do or say will change the fact I fucking murdered you.
Evan didn't budge. He stared Michael down, his glare turned dark and twisted. Though Gregory noticed it wasn't in rage, it was in frustration. It was abundantly clear in that moment that Evan was not a young boy. He was a tortured, agonized person trapped in a form that would never let him grow up. He would never learn to drive, he'd never own a house. Hell, he'd never even make it to high school. But he would know the horrors of purgatory, the terror of being alone for so long. He would know what it was like to be deeply betrayed by your own family. He was not a young boy. He was haggard and hardened, and still, oh, so scared. You're right, Mike. It won't. Evan barked back. He even took a step closer to the animatronic, getting up in his space, not breaking eye contact even for a moment. But you are stupid. You are stupid. You think that after all these years I still care about that. Mike, it's done. It's over. We were kids. None of this ever would have happened if our father was an actual good person. That's it. Evan snapped his weight forward and pushed Michael, hard, in the chest with his hands. It wasn't enough to topple the animatronic over. The action caused Freddy's servos to whine. Michael didn't notice. He just stared at his brother as he continued to yell. Evan's form was no longer pale and staticky, nor was it dark and formless. It was solid, bloomed with color, like it really was a person standing there, now. He was real. I didn't think you cared. That's why I didn't expect you here, Evan snapped. I watched as Uncle Henry tried to keep our father at bay, to fix things. He left and Charlie filled the void. It was never you. When you finally did come, you didn't stay. Michael looked taken aback, like he wanted to respond, but Evan didn't let him. For so long, I waited for you, because I knew if anyone from our family was going to give a shit about what our father did to us, it would be you, Evan yelled, his voice hitting a volume Gregory didn't think was possible from the otherwise meek boy. Where the fuck were you? The air went quiet, dead. It was like Evan had used all the matter in the world to form those words. He stood there, breathing, glaring at his brother. Michael's gaze was not challenging. It was soft and apologetic.
Our sister,
Michael said gently.
Our mother, my friend. I was chasing William for so long. He left so many trails. I had to. I couldn't ignore them.
All of Evan's gusto left him. The saturation of his body fell back into that muted palate. He drew his hands back into his chest. However, he did not stop looking at Michael.
Out of everything, everyone, I expected them to hate me least,
Michael said, almost laughing at the end of the sentence.
Charlie was protecting you. I had to be there for them. I never wanted to leave you, Evan, but you were safe with her.
Evan's eyes were large, taking in every word that Michael said with reverence.
I'm sorry for leaving. I'm sorry for not being there,
Michael said, lowering his eyes once again to look at the floor.
I will never be enough for your forgiveness, but I at least hope you can understand. You're better than I ever will be. You...
Michael stopped, his voice cracking.
You would have been the best our family's ever seen. I would have been so lucky to call you my little brother.
Michael barely finished his sentence before Evan crashed into his chest, wrapping his arms as best he could around Freddy's neck. He buried his nose into Freddy's shoulder plate, Michael looking stunned for a moment, but the look was fleeting. He was quick to wrap his gentle arms around his brother. "You may be stupid," Evan said, voice muffled, "but I still love you. I always will. I know you're sorry." Michael shut his eyes, bringing Evan even closer to his chest.
I don't deserve that.
We don't deserve this, Evan corrected. It's okay, Mikey. It's okay. The pair of them stayed like that for a long time, simply embracing, breathing each other's figurative air. The neon flickered off their forms. Glittering rainbow, the energy settled into something calmer, something more akin to restful. Come on, Mikey, Evan murmured after a while, peeling himself from his embrace. Michael kept his hands on Evan's small shoulders as his brother took a step away. Evan then looked at Gregory, his eyes the most content Gregory had seen from him. there was peace. They have work to do. Michael hummed and met Gregory's eyes. Suddenly, his silver gaze looked kind and warm to Gregory, almost identical to the look Freddie would give him. Gregory found himself liking Michael.
I've been sharing a room with Freddie for some time now, kiddo.
Michael explained.
Sorry for this, I guess.
It's okay, Gregory said, offering Michael a warm smile. I would like him back, though. Michael laughed, and Gregory found he enjoyed that sound, too.
Sure thing, Greg.
Gregory mumbled at the nickname and watched Michael turn back towards Evan. He looked nervous.
What if we can't leave?
Evan blinked, gripping Freddie's fingers as best he could with both hands. He thought about the question for a second before shrugging. Then we'll finish what needs to be done, he said with a short, decisive sigh. Together. Michael nodded, producing his own metallic sigh.
Together.
Evan then lifted his hands away from Freddie's, a soft wisp of light dancing between their fingers. Freddie's eyes flashed again, flecks of blue returning to the irises. Evan adjusted his hands, stepping away, and pulling something, the light, out of Freddie's hands like string. The light changed its shape, forming into what looked like human hands. They were larger than Evan's and littered with little nicks. They looked gentle as Evan pulled them away from Freddie. A person, then, stepped away from the animatronic. They were the same paleness as Evan, dripped in a ripped tank and baggy khaki pants. The person was taller than Evan and sported the curliest mullet Gregory had ever seen. He looked to be in his early 20s. When he looked at Gregory, he immediately recognized the silver in his eyes. He recognized the shape of his nose, the jawline. Evan's older brother. Michael nodded kindly at Gregory before turning to Evan, who was still holding his hands. They exchanged a look, for Evan gestured somewhere to the right with his head, somewhere towards deep in the belly of the pizzeria. Michael nodded, kneeling on the floor in front of his brother. He tucked his hands under Evan's arms and hoisted him upward. Evan let out a happy little yelp as Michael settled him on top of his hip easily. Evan's face was absolutely glowing. Michael turned to them and waved at Gregory with his free hand, Evan doing the same. Gregory returned the gesture before they turned and left, walking towards the space Evan had gestured towards. Gregory watched as the pair ventured off into the air, towards the unknown, together. They disappeared behind a wall, leaving Freddie and Gregory alone once again. Freddie came to a few minutes later, comforting Blue Gaze returning to its residence. It took him a bit to come back, servers coming back online. The bear looked around after all his resets were done, shoulders falling in relief.
Oh,
Freddie said, looking at Gregory with concern.
Are you okay?
All's good, Freddie, Gregory responded, wrapping his arms around the bear in the same manner he'd seen the brothers do it. I'm glad you're back.
My friend's gone,
Freddie responded, wrapping his arms around Gregory comfortingly.
I hope he's okay.
Gregory deepened the hug and thought for a moment about the mountain ahead of them, about the things he had done and will have to do. He pushed it out of his head quickly, though, content enough to just bask in Freddie's gentle embrace for as long as he could. You'll be okay, I think, Gregory said. I love you, Freddie. Freddie took a moment to probably process what Gregory had said, but he didn't hesitate to respond.
Love you too, superstar.
Suddenly, a low sound rumbled from Freddie's chest. Cassis? Suddenly, a low sound rumbled from Freddie. Gregory was thrilled he had convinced the boys to stay. Gregory was thrilled he had convinced the boy to stay in the atrium, away from the chaos. But he did draw Gregory's arm onto his little chest. But he did draw Gregory's arm into his little chest, squeezing the limb with both of his chilly arms. Freddie said. He still didn't sound like he believed. He still didn't sound like he...
The race way is this way,
Freddie said, pointing ahead of them against the linoleum.